Hey Wargamers, today I want to continue our ongoing discussion on how to improve Tau for 9th edition, right? With a look towards the new codex whenever that may arrive. Now, we've focused a lot on unit profiles, on special rules, on rules interactions, all those kind of like basic stuff that's in the traditional codex. But something that is new with 9th edition codices, of course, is secondary objectives, bespoke secondary objectives for your own faction. And yes, of course, we will be getting those for Tau as well. So they're worth considering, especially because they are, almost half of your points. So secondary objectives are a fantastic way for us to re-envision the priorities for a Tau army, right? So one of the main things that we've discussed as being a challenge for Tau is that they suffer on the primary objective, right? They are not an army that is built to really take and hold an objective over a prolonged period of time. And so what if that primary objective wasn't, the primary objective? What if your primary objective was actually your secondaries, right? Your secondaries give you special ways. You get to choose exactly what your game is going to play out like, right? You pick your secondary objectives, and that's really what defines how your game is going to play compared to your opponents, compared to anyone else playing that same army. Picking the secondaries is a huge component of the strategy of your game. And so what if we had secondary objectives that were a little bit more accessible, right? So you would be more prone to score them more easily, perhaps, or more consistently than other armies might be able to, and in a way that compensates for the overall disadvantage that Tau face in the primary objective, right? This isn't trying to give Tau a massive leg up on their opponent in a way that it's just auto win, but balancing in a way that acknowledges that Tau don't do as well in the primary objective. So let's make it a fair fight. Let's give them an alternative pathway to victory by giving them secondary objectives that can compensate for that disadvantage that they have in primary. So maybe there's a way we can build secondaries to counteract a poor primary performance. The other thing about this idea is that it might really fit Tau lore very well, right? We've acknowledged that Tau are not an army that functionally capture and hold objectives very well. But that's also how they're envisioned in the fluff, right? They're not an army that is meant to, go and grab an objective and set up camp and just like, hey, this is ours now. No, they're an army that strikes and fades, that's dynamic, that's cagey, like the Tide, right? Who knew that Tau things might be water related? But yeah, so there's this idea in the Tau fluff that Tau are supposed to be very, very dynamic in that way. And if we can give them secondary objectives that feed into that dynamic approach, then that's simultaneously fluffy and valuable as a game mechanic. And then finally, secondary objectives through specific objectives, but also actions that they offer you can give you a way to imbue certain units with unique functionality that is relatively constrained, right? We've talked about Crute and Vespid as being things that really are somewhat underdeveloped, right? They don't have necessarily the complement of special rules that we would like, and maybe we could say that if we gave them X special rule, that would be really good. But maybe that's a step too far. What if we want to apply that in a more restricted context with only a couple units being able to use that ever throughout the course of game, as opposed to having it incorporated into the actual data sheet where you could just spam that, right? So maybe secondary objectives through the actions that they provide can help us reach some sort of middle ground there where we can offer limited functionality to underdeveloped units in a way that isn't spammable, right? So I think this is three main ways that developing really cool secondary objectives for Tau would be advantageous for the game and also for Tau as a faction. Now, I will admit that this isn't something that I thought extensively about in the past, right? I've been largely focused on what do the data sheets say? What do the stratagems do, right? I've been focused on that. But recently I've been thinking a lot more about these secondaries. And so I've come up with some ideas, some suggestions. I would love to hear your ideas in the comments below. So, put your, wish list secondaries in the comments below and let's have a discussion on that. But so here's a few with one for a few different categories of secondary objectives, and then some extra leftover ideas at the end here. All right, so for No Mercy, No Respite, I was thinking about this objective called Nowhere to Hide. It's a progressive objective. I think like all of these are basically progressive objectives. It says, at the end of each of your shooting phases, score 2 victory points if a Tau Empire unit in your army successfully hit 6 times with marker lights. Score 3 victory points instead if Tau Empire units in your army successfully hit 10 times or more with marker lights. So this is something where it's rewarding you for doing things that you probably want to do anyway, but it is very fluffy, right? I'm trying to think about things that are iconic for Tau, and marker lights are one of them. So what if we had a secondary here that just said, all right, if you're going to be using marker lights, you better get a ton of those out there. Now, I have worded this in a way that excludes some sources of marker lights, right? Like, it's saying that Tau Empire units in your army have to hit with marker light weapons. It's not saying that you would like use a stratagem to do it necessarily or something like that. It's meant to be more like Pathfinders using marker lights. And 6 times is totally achievable, at least in the early game, but keep in mind, marker lights are something that can be prioritized very easily, generally whittled down. And so there's certainly a limited functionality in this, which I think makes it fairly balanced, right? At the beginning of the game, you're going to be able to score this pretty easily. Maybe not the 3 victory point version, but at least the 2 victory point version. And then over the course of the game, that functionality is going to decrease. And so this is something that offers a boon in terms of points, but isn't a sure bet for the entirety of the game or anything like that. All right, so this next one for shadow operations is a secondary objective that I was thinking of, again, in a way that we can offer some really cool functionality to units in a limited way. We've talked about Crude and Vespid as being units that really have a ton of potential in terms of flavor and in terms of strategy. And I think that this suggestion here strikes a fair balance between offering that functionality but not making it totally overwhelming or exploitable. And it gives you a reason to take Crude and Vespid. So I think I'm pretty excited about this one. I like this idea. It just feels fun to use and as a valid tactical choice as well. So the strategy is, or stratagem, no, secondary objective is auxiliary counteroffensive, which is again a progressive objective. It says if you select this objective, then Crude and Vespid units from your army can attempt the following action: Fieldcraft Trap, and the name here is an allusion to previous rules for both Crude and Vespid, where they have benefits for being in woods or being in ruins. So kind of bringing that in, and then also merging this a little bit with the functionality of like Deus Grec. So you'll see. Fieldcraft Trap is an action. One Crude or Vespid unit from your army can start to perform this action at the end of your movement phase. Blah, blah, blah about when and how you do that. It's not an objective. You can't have things close by. If completed, that objective marker is said to have been trapped by your army. If the objective marker was trapped by a Crude unit, the next enemy unit to be within 3 inches of that objective suffers D3 mortal wounds. So this is pretty much like Deus Grec's trap. If the objective marker was trapped by a Vespid unit, subtract 2 inches from movement and charge distances of enemy units within 3 inches of the objective for the rest of the game. Now, this is kind of a callback to one of the ideas we've had about Vespid in the past, about having them, giving them some sort of ability to interfere with units' movement, something that we've talked about multiple times as a value for Tau, but again, it's only on a single unit each turn and has a really limited zone of influence. So, something that I think is, again, a fairly good compromise. But the VESPID one affects the remainder of the game, whereas the CRUT one is a discrete single instance. Now, how does this actually affect scoring? It says each time a unit from your army completes the Fieldcraft Trap action, score 2 victory points. So each time you do this, you get 2 victory points. That's fairly doable, right? Especially if you have CRUT in your deployment zone. You could, trap something at the beginning of the game, and then later on in the game, you can use VESPITE to trap things further away, or you can figure it out. And then score 2 additional victory points at the end of each turn in which 1 or more enemy units were affected by a trap. So this is really something that would probably ramp up a lot more as the game progressed, especially with the VESPID one, right? You could booby trap a objective in the midfield early on in the game, and then as units start hanging out there more, you are going to have an opportunity to rack up more points throughout the rest of the game. But it's not, overwhelming amount, right? So I like this balance here. I like that you're rewarded for having your auxiliary units kind of mess with the objectives early on, and then you can kind of accrue points over the course of the game depending on how well you did that. For Purge the Enemy, I have the Patient Hunter, which is another name for Cao Yun. This is, again, a progressive objective. At the end of each of your shooting phases, score 1 victory point for each enemy unit, up to 2, that was destroyed that phase by a unit in your army that was wholly within your deployment zone. If 3 or more units were destroyed this way, score 4 victory points instead. So if you're able to sit back, shoot something off the board, congratulations, you get a victory point. You can, if you get 3 or more units, you get 4 victory points. That seems like a fluffy way of racking up some points, right? And it's kind of thinking about Cao Yun as, not wanting to be that dynamic, assertive army, but hanging back in your deployment zone and, pew-pewing things off the board from there. The counterpart to this, of course, is going to be Battlefield Supremacy, where I suggest the Killing Blow, or the Manka secondary objective, which again is a progressive objective. At the end of each of your turns, score 2 victory points if an enemy unit was destroyed by a core unit in your army that had advanced or performed a Manta Strike this turn. Score 1 additional victory point if the destroyed unit was not in your deployment zone. So again, kind of basically the opposite, right? Like you get 2 victory points if you are moving forward and being really aggressive and you kill something, and then you get an additional victory point if it wasn't in your deployment zone, which probably it would be if you were using a Manka approach. I think this works out really well if Crisis Suit are core, which I really hope they are. I'm going to be surprised if they're not. But basically, yeah, it almost relies on Crisis Suits being core, but not exclusively. Right? There are lots of ways that you could do this, not using Crisis Suits, but I think Crisis Suits are the most fun way to do this. Right, but you have a unit of Crisis Suits come in, they peg something, you get 2 victory points right off the bat for killing it, and then it's probably not going to be in your deployment zone, so you get 1 more. Yeah, like we could do that. I feel like that's a fairly accomplishable goal, especially if you're picking your targets with this secondary objective in mind, right? If you're not necessarily trying to just kill everything, but instead picking your targets with the goal of secondary objective points in mind, this could be a way to do it. And of course, with all of these, like you could tweak the numbers, right? Like, you could give 2 additional victory points if it wasn't in your deployment zone or whatever. Right? We still have to keep in mind that there's a limit to how many points you can score on each secondary objective, but still, I think you could tweak these in a way that give each of these secondary objectives a fair chance of being completed to their fullest throughout a game. Other potential ideas. What if there was a secondary objective that said have 3 or 4 more units from your army more than 12 inches away from an enemy unit? So again, kind of rewarding that cagey style of play, like, hey, you do whatever you need to do, but just don't get touched. Right, and so the more you do that, the more victory points you can score, or something that says perform seer protocols for 3 units, or however many units. Saber protocols are something that are, at this point, fairly iconic for Tau. And so doing something like that, whatever Saber protocols ends up being in the next edition, probably not exactly what it is now. But if you do that a bunch, you get victory points. That'd be cool. This next one I think is not going to happen, but it'd be cool to think about, right? So we talked about how like you could use secondary objectives to give actions to certain units. What if there was one for battle suits that allowed them to basically jump away from an objective, right? So they are on an objective, they do whatever they're doing on the objective, but then they can start an action at the end of their shooting phase or in the charge phase that allows them to, move back 8 inches or whatever. Right? Like that's a little bit of a clunky mechanic, but still, like what if there was a way that you could do that? That'd be neat. That'd be a way to allow that functionality in a way that's consistent with the fluff, but because the whole jump, shoot, jump mechanic where you used to be able to move and then shoot and then move again is reminiscent of that strike and fade philosophy for Tau. And so if we could offer that in a very limited context through this action, I think that would be a win. Because I think it's really unlikely that we would see jump, shoot, jump return, wholesale for the entirety of the army, right? So this gives us a compromise. Again, Games Workshop, I'm trying to compromise with you. Just meet me halfway. Meet me halfway with this. Another action, what if there's like a action that a character can take that rallies core units or something? What does that mean? I don't really know. But right, like one of the things we think about with Tau is this unity, this teamwork approach, this cohesion. And so what if there was an action that they could take just to score objective points, where they're like, hey, let's all be for the greater good. You remember the greater good, guys? Yeah, let's keep doing that. Hey, Phil, you're doing great over there. Keep it up. Right? Like something like that would be cool. It'd be a good fit for something like an ethereal. It'd be something really, pretty practical for a Fireblade or any other type of infantry character. So I think that would be a cool option as well. And then finally, something where we are rewarded for having different types of battlesuits. Again, sticking with that theme of unity, cohesion, diversity, right? If we have different battlesuits in a cluster outside your deployment zone or something, right? However you want to contextualize that. But if you were rewarded for taking more different types of battlesuits, not just taking Riptides, not just taking Crisis suits, but let's say, you get one victory point for every, additional type of battlesuit you have within 6 inches of, any other battlesuit. So if you had like a Riptide and Crisis suits and Stealth suits all in a cluster, you would get, 2 victory points that turn. That'd be cool, right? And that, again, fits with the ideas that we've talked about, where we want Tau to fight as one, but also to be really dynamic. And so this type of secondary objective would be consistently scoreable, but still allow Tau to do the things Tau want to do. Yeah. So those are some ideas. I hope some of them are good. If they're not, please let me know. And if you have any ideas, throw them down there too, because this is fun to talk about. So let me know what you think would be a good secondary objective for Tau. Be as specific as possible, and we'll have a conversation about it. Yeah. So thanks for watching, and as always, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This channel is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Really, the support means more to me than you realize. So special thanks to Tau Oswell, Stephen Cowan, Jared Egler, Scott Heater, Michael Byrne, Robbie Goodwin, Chris Kessler, Durza, Zealous Brimstone, Ever Keller, Drew Pralley, Ruger, Jose Gomez, A Little Pink Monster, and Benaby Jones.